Could he act as some kind of catalyst? Because Justice and the Moon they both have the duality, and so in order for them to conjunct, could he be like a pioneer or catalyst in that marriage? The pioneer balances duality or something.
I love it. That's really nice. And that really does bring through that conjunction idea really well, especially when we again examine, like Penny used the word, I think, over self, this higher self, this mind or level of experience has that power to bring that balance to duality, and to reconcile those differences. And so I think that's a really, really nice way of really finding the experience of conjunction in these cards.
Welcome, everyone. So we are here doing our latest installation in our Alchemy and Tarot series. Here we're focusing on the operation of conjunction. Now, as we are in a bit of a pattern here, where we're beginning with our visual meditation. And then we will go in, there will be our lunar consciousness aspect of the alchemical process. And then we shall go into the solar aspect, which is the facts and figures, which I think Penny will be handling today. And lastly, we will have the stellar mode, in which Joy will take us through a discussion of the cards in the tableau. So first off, we will begin here with just a silent meditation on the cards. I mean, it's some images and emblems. now we are going to do our response phase of the meditation, in which we're going to focus on two images in particular, for about 2 minutes. And you are welcome to share aloud any one word or short phrase of response based on what you see. It's okay if people overlap, that's fine. But we'll just go ahead and just say aloud once you have go ahead. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the next image here. This is from Splinter Service.
Cerberus.
Crown.
Dynamic.
Coming together.
Reds and blues.
Intuition.
Power.
Unity of purpose.
Conversations. Productive.
Midsummer.
Order.
The three heads are reassuring.
Integrating the shadow.
Finding commonalities.
Attraction.
All right, we'll move on to our next image.
Integration.
This made me smile.
Conjunction.
Demarcation.
Separate but equal.
Unified boundaries.
Powerful. powerful.
What's combining?
A different perspective.
Compromise.
Water, earth, and air.
All right. That'll bring our meditation to a close. Thank you very much for your responses. Those were all great ones.
That last image was really cool, John. Do you
Yeah.
happen to know where that is?
I'm not sure precisely where the location is. I know the one in the slideshow, the confluence in the slideshow is from in Geneva. That's all I know there.
Well, the next portion of today's presentation, we will focus on the solar, or as we're putting it, facts and figures or nuts and bolts part of our the alchemical stage of conjunction that we're looking at today. For most of you probably know that we're kind of to some degree following Dennis Hauck's book, The Sorcerer's Stone. So the slideshow that we'll look at next is just a very brief kind of abbreviation of a lot of what he talks about, just kind of enough to get the conversation going and sort of bring in some context for the third portion that Joy's going to do, focusing more on the tarot. So I'll just read along. Fourth stage of conjunction. So the word conjunction itself means the action or instance of two or more aspects occurring at the same point in time and space, or a joining or meeting of distinct individuals or things. So this conjunction stage is the fourth stage in our 7-stage series that we're doing. And in that, this diagram, the Azoth of the philosophers, it is the stage at the very top of the wheel. It is the rectificando or rectification, and refers to the setting of things right. The goal of conjunction is the recombination and integration of the purified or liberated remains of the original substance, or us, or the alchemist in this case, that was originally acted upon during the first 3 stages of calcination, dissolution, and separation. And so these remains are then, recombined and integrated into a brand new or unified substance. So this is the element of air, and we started with fire and then water and then air in our last stage of separation. So conjunction employs the element of earth, which, is kind of the amalgamation or conclusion of those first 3, but that it is that which also facilitates the creation of what's called the lesser stone. I've also seen it called the first stone. But with that which is necessary to formulate before we can then progress to the next and final 3 stages, where we'll be working with the elements again, but kind of at a higher octave. So in the laboratory, conjunction was endeavored to by the fusing or amalgamating of metals or the saved materials from those previous processes into a new chemical reaction or a new substance, but often with the aid of some kind of mediator, such as an acid or another catalyst. So conjunction is a place where what some call the alchemical crucifixion takes place. This is, again, that surviving or remaining in purified substance that's left after those first three operations, again, or the alchemist or us. This is where that is fixed upon the cross of the elements, which represents the union of the vertical axis of reality, or the above and the below, with the horizontal axis, or that of soul and spirit. In this stage, the substance or alchemist is fixed to the center of the cross, and thereby this is a representation of the elements in balance and sort of those balanced or integrated polarities, which then reveals the fifth element, or the quintessence. Conjunction has been referred to as the marriage of the sun and moon, and symbolizes the sought after union of the solar and lunar consciousness. And as we have learned so far, the solar and lunar represent the conscious and subconscious modes, masculine and feminine aspects, or the rational and intellectual based thought processes, with the lunar more intuitive and sensory based processes. So with this marriage, or marriage of the mind, as it's also called, where soul and spirit have come together, there is this experience that some refer to as the creation of the intelligence of the heart, because you have sort of that mind, heart, or rational intuition emergence. So in this union, one may learn to navigate and integrate the conflicting or polarized aspects of their own personality using this intelligence of the heart, which will definitely be needed in healing work to kind of beef us up as we move on to the next three stages. So conjunction is governed over by Venus. And again, Venus is seen at that top right ray of the wheel. So Venus is considered to be the brightest of the planets and also the slowest. And I thought that was interesting, given that even though Venus governs this stage, it's the element of Earth we're working with. And Earth, it's not necessarily that it's the brightest, but bright for us in the sky means what's most visible. So Venus is one of the most visible. And for us, Earth is, the most visible thing around us. And Earth, or matter, as we know, is the slowest vibratory, or is a slower vibratory rate than spirit. And so I liked that connection with how the actual planet Venus operates with the element of Earth that we're working with in conjunction. And Venus, also being known as the morning or evening star, right there embodies sort of dual modes that, again, we're kind of looking at when we talk about conjunction with the solar and lunar, or the king and queen, or day and night aspects. Venus rules the signs of Taurus and Libra, and kind of general characteristics or things that she governs: arts, beauty, harmony, aesthetics, receptivity, adaptation, attraction, desire, values and possessions, relationships, receptivity, and feminine energy. So in the religions or veneration of the goddess Venus, or Aphrodite, there were temples made in her honor that were served to be schools for love and pleasures of the flesh. And in the sacred rites, it related to that sacred marriage that was similar to what we talked about with the sun and the moon, that along with the physical acts that accompanied it, were thought to allow one to escape the cycle of birth and death and rebirth, to be born again on a newer or higher level of reality. And then in mythology, Venus was the mother of Cupid and wife of Vulcan, but as we all know, had her dalliances and affairs with Mars. So the metal associated with this stage is copper. And here's where this information is painfully abbreviated. The chapter in Hauck's book is quite extensive on copper and its uses and all kinds of things. So I definitely recommend, if the metals part of these stages interests you, to definitely check out his chapter on copper. So copper is in the same elemental group on the periodic table as gold. And it is very malleable and adaptable, or what he refers to as sectile, meaning it's easily cut, sliced, or shaped. And when copper oxidizes or is in verdigris, it achieves this greenish patina that I'm sure we've all seen, which again, that green kind of resonates with Venus as the green ray on the Azoth. Also the couple of the tarot keys that correspond to Venus, green is also their color as well. But we see this patina, one big example is on the Statue of Liberty, which its outer shell is a thin layer of copper, and you see quite a bit of verdigris or that patina there. So in copper, we find lots of unique and beneficial applications and relationships using all the four elements that are pretty impactful to our society and our way of life. And so I thought copper seemed particularly connected to this idea of earth in that it, takes from everything and makes earth as, what's tangible that we actually use and relate to. So with the element of fire, since copper is such a wonderful conductor of heat and electricity, we use it in electrical components and wiring, with water because it's mainly rust resistant and anti-corrosive, which is why it's been used in pipes, transporting this necessary water to everything. With air, the early radios used copper coils for transmission and other transmission devices. Those copper coils were a very necessary element. And then with the element of earth, it's a very necessary element in our body for our health. And it's a fairly common element. It's considered, it's not the most common, but it has a fairly common rate in the Earth's crust as well. As an important element to our health and our body function, copper plays a huge part in maintaining our bones, blood vessels, nerves, and immune function. And then with iron, copper is partly what enables our body to create our red blood cells. For years, people have used copper in jewelry to promote health and well-being, used in the healing of wounds, easing of chronic pain, and strengthening the blood. And foods rich in copper include nuts and seeds, lobster, liver, oysters, sweet potato, and shiitake mushrooms. So kind of a interesting mix of foods there. So Hauck goes into this aspect a little more in the book too. There's some other interesting things online you can find, but generally this is sort of I guess, narrowing down of the average of kind of what I researched on this. But physiologically, the stage of conjunction mostly relates to our body's sexual and physical energies, more in the transformative powers that they have, and it relates to the anahata or heart chakra. And then psychologically and transformatively, the stage is thought to bring a renewed sense of what is of value to us and worth building upon, opening of the heart, the union of masculine and feminine energies, a new sense of empowerment and discernment, the transformation of our belief systems, heightened synchronization of our left and right brains, easier to access or utilize intuitive states, a greater awareness of synchronicities or confirmations of our progress in the work, and the union of solar and lunar consciousness that then gives rise to that stellar consciousness. And ultimately, one may experience an identification with a unified self that is true to one's inner essence and outer universal truths. And that last line is something that I found pretty much everywhere I looked. So in Hauck's book, he talks about something called the overself as an exercise that someone can do when working with this stage of conjunction. It's basically the practice of just maintaining that presence of that stellar consciousness or the higher presence in every circumstance, the mundane, the challenging, and just keeping that centered presence and actually using sort of the opposing modes of the personality or of our psyche for solutions rather than just as something that kind of wars with each other. Different types of meditations you could look into for this phase would be anything that focuses or activates the pituitary and pineal bodies, especially integratively, tantric and yogic exercises, and devotional or dedicational practices. And then, so because we are working with the earth element, anything that you're doing with earth, any ritual-based communing with nature, he talks about in the book, basically creating a sacred circle, going out in the forest, sitting at each of the directions, acknowledging those in the ways that are part of either your tradition or that feel right to you. So just kind of creating that unified space or circle, but working with the earth specifically. So this will all be in the handout that I'll upload in a few minutes. And most of these images here, we saw either these same ones or something very similar during John's awesome slideshow. So we won't go too much further into that, but you guys will have these on hand. So looking back to the Emerald Tablet, which is something we read and talked about to some length in the very first class in January, I just wanted to touch upon that again. So he as in Hermes, but the tablet, when it speaks to elements, it's seeing the elements more as differentiations or expressions of the one thing, or as like a formulaic process. So there's a specific line that speaks to elements directly. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon, the wind carries it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. It is the origin of all, the consecration of the universe. Its inherent strength is perfected if it is turned into earth. So this line kind of tells the story of creation, but it is also like a formula for progression and perfection. So with the first line, its father is the sun or fire. There's the idea that the prima materia is generated by the power of fire. Generated or moved upon. And then with water, its mother is the moon, basically saying that this essence is developed or birthed by the power of water, brought down and disseminated from the heavens by the power of air, or the wind carries in its belly. So we're establishing that above and below. And then nourished and solidified by or within the power of earth. So its strength is perfected. Sometimes strength is exchanged for the word power, but when you say its strength is perfected, if it's changed into earth, it speaks to earth as kind of seen as the sort of fruit of the labors, or the thing that is the result that actually, as humans, that we actually engage with. But at the same time, it is more than earth. It is of the earth or by the earth, but yet it's different than the earth because it's truly infused consciously with spirit at that point. So matter, or the prime matter, has to be brought into that earth element if in a human form we're actually able to engage with it. So that's just a little bit on the tablet to touch back on that. And then I also wanted to just bring up briefly about the number 4, because this is the 4th stage, and there's a bit of connection here with that number and the 4th stage. So in Greek and esoteric number philosophy, the number 4 represents form and substance and earth, dimension and depth, perfection and spirit dwelling within form, and foundations or a plateau that one reaches before a new stage begins. And it's also the number of classification. We have 4 directions, the 4 elements, 4 corners of the earth, 4 seasons, 4 universal forces, and so on. So this idea of the number 4 to the ancients, and we carried it into our kind of general thinking today, but these ideas of wholeness or stability, something being just and solid, and just goodness. And it's kind of the power that moves through life. And so there's all these cultural phrases that have kind of come down to us that speak to this. So like a square deal, a square meal, something being fair and square, to face something squarely, going back to square one, getting square with the facts, having 2 feet squarely on the ground. So just this idea of, you can really see through those phases, that solidity and kind of like justness or rightness that the square or 4 kind of inherently has within it. So the number 4 in extension, which is the addition of all the numbers, the number 4 and all the numbers leading up to it. So 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 is 10, and then 10 reduces to 1. So we see with 4, when reaching that 10, there's that idea of like that plateau or sort of culmination. But because 10 is 1, it's kind of back to the beginning, but as something new. And so I really liked that connection with conjunction, because with conjunction as the first stage that works with Earth, and the combining and recombining of all those elements, I think the number 4 works really well with that. The connection with conjunction and the number 4 is also highlighted in those ideas of form and substance with the Earth element and the creation of the lesser cube. And then the cross is also a symbol for 4, the forms of the cross. And we saw that earlier when we talked about the alchemical crucifixion, or the cross of the elements that the volatile is fixed upon. So to wrap up, and I'm not going to go too in depth on these because that's what our next section is about more at length for discussion. But just in terms of just Venus in the tarot, in the Major Arcana, we see her with key 3, the Empress, as Venus, key 5, the Hierophant, as Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, and key 11, Justice, or Libra, also ruled by Venus. So those are 3 major arcana cards that are related to Venus specifically. And then I also pulled up the minor arcana cards, where Venus is in the decan or rules the decan. I thought that was interesting. That's something you guys can look at if you'd like. But particularly, obviously, the 2 of Cups, that idea of, some of the imagery we saw with the king and queen and the union or coitus or those types of alchemical images. There's some connection there a bit, even with the 4 of Wands in terms of like that milestone or sort of a level reached that has to do with the number 4 conjunction as well. So, and then to kind of segue into our tableau and looking at the major arcana cards of the stage of conjunction, we'll be looking at the 4th column in this tableau, which I'm pretty sure has been handed out in the last 3 previous handouts. But the cards that we'll be looking at today will be the Emperor, Justice, and the Moon. And one quick thing that I liked was Justice here as Libra, but connected to Venus, is the middle of the tableau, and conjunction being sort of the middle of our stages as Venus, I thought was a nice little parallel. So on that will be the end of that segue. I'll or the presentation, and a good segue for Joy, and I will upload that handout into the chat.
Does anyone have any questions for Penny? We're getting into our discussion here in just a second, but if there are any questions for Penny, there's time to take a couple.
I don't know if this is just a kind of a aesthetic thing, but the Fool card is right above this row, and that seems to relate, Penny, to a lot of the things that you were talking about, and the ideas of merging things and letting go of outcomes and things like that. So I don't know, or is it just because it happened to be in the middle?
Yeah, I can see what you're saying with that. I'm guessing, yeah, we'll probably associate that too here when we look at the tableau. But yeah, I think there's definitely an interesting connection we can look at with the Fool card sitting above this column for sure.
Any other questions for Penny? Okay, Emily.
I noticed that in Hauck, he actually revises that image of Azoth, the philosopher. And in this class, we keep using the original from whatever it is, 1613 or something. Yeah. But Hauck, I know it's been mentioned a few times that the he puts the moon and the sun at the end of that sequence. And he actually creates an image where he juggles the signs. He doesn't change the images, but he moves the planetary signs to match what he says in his text. And I wondered if it might be useful if we sometimes looked at that, because there is that kind of confusion that comes up, at least for me. Last week, I got quite muddled because I kind of lost track of that. That there's a different planetary association with the alchemical stages. I think it's once you get to 4, because you even pointed here to the original image and pointed to Venus, and it was at stage number 5. But in Hauck's revised diagram, it's at number 4.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
the diagram that I have is just the one I've had forever that I did colored in. So it's more like a visual thing. But yeah, I can definitely look at like if it's going to be applied next time. But yeah, the 5, I noticed that as well. And I actually at one point meant to
because it's like your
numbers. Yeah.
The brain sort of blinks, and yet it's weird. Everything else seems to fit.
Yeah.
Until you start matching it up with the tarot cards. And then I was doing like you were doing here, you lined up the cards with their astrological associations, which I find very interesting. And maybe there's less shoehorning to make it work than with Case's tableau, although I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, he actually has a little black and white diagram in his book. So it might be helpful if we sometimes used that, or at least put them both up there so we can see.
I'll just have to Photoshop my color one. It's a little prettier.
Yeah, I figured that's why he does it in black and white, because he would get mixed up with the coloring. That would have been a more complicated exercise for him. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily.
Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to our discussion and are looking at the 7x3 table. I do want to mention that we did discuss in one of the first 2 classes, we did go over the that distortion of arrangement of the planets, and I outlined it a little bit more clearly on my blog as well. So there are a couple resources for you. It's very simply a difference between the Chaldean order of the planets, which goes from slowest to fastest, starting with Saturn and then going Jupiter, Mars, Sun, then Venus, Mercury, Moon, and many alchemists follow that, particularly Basil Valentine, which is where that Azoth image is taken from. But there are also alchemists prior to Hauck. He's not the first to do this. And that one little, the one little alchemy book, I read 2 alchemy books like 20 years ago, and he actually addresses this in that. I don't know if I have it like totally right to hand, but the Alchemy by Titus Burckhardt. He addresses the difference between those, and the other one follows what we call the Thema Mundi, and that is a map of the planets to the signs, starting with the moon in Cancer, and that's placed over on the east side of the way an astrological chart is laid out in the first house. The moon in Cancer is in the first house, and then the sun in Leo is in the second house. And so it's following the zodiacal order of the signs. And then Mercury rules the signs of Gemini and Virgo. So it's above the moon and it's below the sun. So and then it goes in order from that, the Mercury signs, and then the Venus signs, the Mars signs, Jupiter signs, and then Capricorn and Aquarius, opposite to the sun and moon, both ruled by Saturn. Burckhardt really preferred the Basil Valentine approach and didn't like the Thema Mundi approach as much, but I really like the Thema Mundi approach and Hauck's take on it as well. And the thing that's interesting is that the Thema Mundi starts with Cancer and just really kind of goes through the lower half of that astrological chart, filling in Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And so our process in alchemy starts with Saturn in Aquarius and then goes back along the top half of the chart, Aquarius, and then onto Pisces and Jupiter, Aries and Mars, and Taurus and Venus, which is where we are now. And it ends with the sun in Leo. And so it really highlights the beginning of the process in Aquarius with Saturn, and then the middle or culmination of the process with the lesser stone at Venus and Taurus, and then finally achieves the final product with the sun in Leo. And it brings to mind the age of Taurus, when Taurus was the vernal equinox, and that put the sign of Leo at the summer solstice and the sign of Aquarius at the winter solstice. And so it's a very I think it's a very powerful arrangement, and to me, it just makes more sense if our ultimate goal is led to gold, to go from Saturn to the sun, rather than having the sun be the halfway point. When you put the sun as a halfway point, that does bring about that idea of the lesser stone. It makes the moon the final ultimate achievement. And so the moon becomes associated with the red king, and Mercury is the white queen. I think a lot of the symbolism fits the other way better, but because Valentine is one of the just kind of best known authors, and Titus Burckhardt having written in the 60s and being one of the, now there's a lot of books available on alchemy, but he was probably, I don't know how many books were available at the time, but I just know that he was a very well-known one. And so for him to kind of prefer one method, I think that ended up influencing probably a lot of people. So I do think that that's super fascinating, and there's a lot of information there. And to me, it's really worthwhile to follow this Thema Mundi pattern. We should say, and we probably should have said every single time, that that Azoth image that we've been using was colored in by Adam McLean, and he's got, as you probably know, if you go to the Alchemy website, I think that's the URL, alchemywebsite.com and levity.com, I think are his two websites, but he has an exorbitant amount of amazing information, very detailed information on alchemy, tons of hand-colored emblems that he's colored in himself, as well as other emblems that were originally in color and that he shares. He has tons of tarot stuff too. So it's absolutely an amazing website, and I highly recommend it. But the Azoth image we've been using was colored by him. So that said, I want to go ahead and share my screen and go into our conjunction cards. Okay, so here we're working with the 7x3 table and the middle column, which is the conjunction cards. And so, and it's funny that Eleanor already brought up the Fool thing, because I'm not using the Fool. And so, but I don't mind talking about it. the table, or what Paul Foster Case calls the tableau, actually derives from the French school, which is pretty obvious in the fact that he uses the word tableau to describe it. Tableau simply meaning table. And Papou published a version of it in 1910, which I did not put into the slideshow. I didn't think people would be interested, but now that it seems to have already come up, I'm wishing I had put it in. He actually arranges the cards starting with 1 here and going down. So number 2 is here, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on, in going down vertically instead of across. And he adds the Fool here in the penultimate position, which is the way the French tradition does it. And then the World card gets assigned all the way across the bottom. 2 columns here, 2 columns here, 2 columns here, and doesn't get assigned to the 7th column. I think I'll do a meetup on the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup on this topic, because I think it's pretty interesting. And so if you're interested in that, you can watch my upcoming meetings, and I'll try to post that at some point soon. And so then Oswald Wirth, in his 1927 book on the tarot, includes both the Papou version, where it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. He does not include the Fool at all. He just lists numbers ending in 21. And then he also gives an arrangement where you outline it vertically or horizontally. I mean, 1, 2, 3 through 7, 8 through 14, and 15 through 21. And of course, in the French school, this card in the center would actually be the Strength card. And you can see the numbering in this. It actually says 8 on it because I'm using Oswald Wirth's cards here, and 11 is over here. And of course, in the Toth deck, you would get I believe adjustment is number 8, and lust is number 11. So so we definitely have some differences in the way that these cards can be laid out. And obviously, you know, we've kind of come into an accepted order that we mostly work with, but there's no reason not to twist your brain around some of the alternate orders and see what you learn from the various ones. The top row we are assigning to sulfur and the soul. In Oswald Wirth's metaphor, he calls this the subject of we talk about a sentence that we can put together. It's also considered a principle or just the idea of is. And then in the second row, this is the Mercury or spirit level. And again, Oswald Wirth actually switches this and puts spirit up at the top and soul in the middle. So again, there's no single right way of doing this. And that's true with a lot of alchemy, just the very fact that Basil Valentine uses the Chaldean order of planets and other writers use the Thema Mundi order of the planets. To me, one of the things that's most difficult about alchemy is the very fact that the facts and figures don't line up. They're not consistent across all the authors. But one of the things that's the most empowering about alchemy is that whenever you learn something new, it's really important to get the facts and figures straight first, and then to start working with it and meditating it. And if there is things that morph for you and you get insight by morphing with it, then you go through that stage and ultimately arrive at your own inner knowledge around something. And in alchemy, the facts and figures are actually all in the practice. And that's why I believe that alchemy is always taught as you cannot just study the philosophy of it, you must practice it. You must do herbal alchemy, herbal tinctures, or metallurgy, or at the very least you do your meditations with the practice and find how it appears in your life, because the doing metallurgy in particular, you can go very, very wrong with that and you can do it right. And so that really will teach you the right and wrong way of doing this. And with tinctures are much more forgiving, therefore easier and safer. But you can still have successful outcomes in unsuccessful outcomes, things that don't work the way you want them to. And so that's really where we get our right and wrong in the process of alchemy. So again, we're using something that's a little more commonly understood, which is putting the soul level at the top, the spirit level here, and the body level at the bottom. I think one way to keep it straight and to understand it is that the spirit level is a level of the life force. It is a movable level that changes and aspires and can link above and below. And that's part of Mercury's role. Whereas sulfur is the soul, it's the is, which always is and maintains a steady presence. And we think of the soul as a thing that lasts beyond the body. When the body is no more, the soul continues and is reincarnated. And so we give that kind of a higher level, but these are all personal levels. This is not spirit to mean the all, you know, the all that is, or the limitless, or what we normally refer to as the divine, even though a lot of people use the word spirit to reference the divine. So we're looking at the Emperor, Justice, and the Moon. And so the first thing is to think about how these are expressions of that idea of conjunction. I like to start I'm really liking Oswald Wirth's way of doing the subject, verb, and object. And so we might even start with looking at what is conjunction and look at subject, verb, and object. And we'll be doing that more with the tarot spread, but that's going to be a little bit more of a personal experience of this. And so at this point, we would be looking at subject, verb, object, trying to assess a universal sentence to universally describe the process of conjunction. So who has some suggestions here? So when we look at
Joy, in terms of the emperor and the subject, what comes to mind for me is like a leader, but also like leading by example.
Okay, I love that.
More than just a leader, because leaders can be good leaders or bad leaders, but so kind of leading by example, or if there's another word to put those two things together.
I love that. And I feel like our Splendor Solace image that we were looking at down at the bottom, the little scene at the bottom, was a bunch of people consulting with a king and with another kind of magistrate or counselor or something like that. And so the idea of a leader that is advising or guiding, I think, is a really good example, and it showed up in our Splendor Solace image as well. Cool. What can we do with our verb for the Justice card? What is a verb that we could say that we could derive from the image of the Justice card? So what does our leader do?
He weighs or contemplates.
Yeah, he weighs and evaluates and contemplates. Yeah, that's great. And so then what would an example be for the Moon card for the object? What is he weighing or contemplating?
His own authority or vision, or
Vision. Okay. Okay. With the moon card. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Weighing is vision. What else?
I think it has to do more with action, like he's like there's this inspiration to, look at everything that he's learned in his, I shouldn't say he, but anyway, that's learned in the life, and then weigh that, evaluate, contemplate, bring in other people's opinions, and then kind of either by example or by verbiage inspire action. So I guess vision is kind of like that. Maybe inspire action would be what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, nice. Okay, good. So our leader evaluates ways or contemplates. Our leader ways and that we could still go do a moon word here. There's I mean, the syntax of the sentence, it's like I guess we could say he weighs or evaluates in order to clarify his vision. So yeah, that works really nicely. Okay, so the leader weighs options in order to clarify his vision. Nice.
Or it could be that the moon brings in the element of like the fullness of time. So the leader weighs and acts in due course, and then you get the conjunction aspect with the moon as eclipses or what have you. So to me, that card brings in acting at the right moment, which doesn't quite fit your noun, verb, and object. But
yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, so the leader weighs in due time in order to act in due time. That makes really good sense to me too. I always go for the simple first, so I'm going to throw that out. To me, the leader here, I really like there's a strong contrast for me between the emperor and the moon, and so I might say something simple like the leader weighs with his intuition, or weighs his intuition, evaluates his intuition, which is a word I like to use with the moon card. So when we think about any of these sentences that we've come up with, how do we relate it back to conjunction? And some people have already kind of said that, but let's go back and look at it as an expression of conjunction. Like for me, in my sentence, I like the conjunction of the leader, which is a little bit more of a logical or solar energy, and the fact that he's working with his intuition, which is more of that lunar, because the conjunction is this connection or marriage of the sun and moon, and so that works so wonderfully for me. I think that's these cards are really nice in terms of that. But what other expressions of the conjunction energy do you see in these three, or in our sentences that we wrote?
I was thinking about the emperor and the moon kind of being that marriage thing that was brought up, and that marriage of insight and right action and following your heart and that kind of thing leads to the emperor side of it kind of gives us stability, and then the moon side of it opens up the creativity.
Nice.
Opens up possibility, maybe is a better word.
Yeah, love it. Good. What else? Anybody else have one to discuss with that?
Could he act as some kind of catalyst? Because justice and the moon they both have the duality, and so in order for them to conjunct, could he be like a pioneer or catalyst in that marriage?
Oh, very good. So he the pioneer, our verb would be with the justice might be pioneers opposites or differences. What would you come up with for the moon? The pioneer differentiates.
Or like
I'm trying to bring it back to, yeah.
balance with justice, but there's the two things that are balancing, and then the duality of the moon, like between the duality between many things, but between like the domestic and the wild, which is always what I think of when I see the moon. I don't know, the pioneer balances duality or something.
I love it. I love it. That's really nice. And that really does bring through that conjunction idea really well, especially when we again examine, like Penny used the word, I think, over self. And so this idea of this higher self, or this, I think it was over self that she said, this higher self, this mind, or level of experience, has that power to bring that balance to duality, and to reconcile those differences. And so I think that's a really, really nice way of really finding the experience of conjunction in these cards. What I want to do now is go and take a look back. So these are the cards from dissolution. And so look at this really interesting thing. Well, and I want to say, I was going to try, I didn't, to me, there is a leading up in these three levels to this main central level here, and then a descending energy again, kind of a building up and a coming down. And that there is, in many ways, there is just a simple ascent through these levels to ultimately starting with the first level and arriving at the height of achievement here. But I do think that there's kind of also a bell curve energy to this. And when we do centralize this, then we get pairs where we can match these two up, and then this one and this one up, and then these two. And so the one that struck me as the most interesting to start with is this right here. We've got the Emperor, who's associated with the sign of Aries, and the Tower, which is Mars. And so both of those things are very similar. I mean, Aries is ruled by Mars. Aries is also, interestingly, the exaltation of the sun. So even if you wanted to go back to placing the sun in the middle, which I don't mean to confuse everybody, but I love switching it around and thinking of it from multiple perspectives. If we want to go back to the Chaldean order, the way the color diagram lists the sun at this stage, the sun is exalted in Aries. So what a really interesting placement here. But we're going to stick to Venus. I just did want to say that Aries is ruled by, the ruling planet of Aries is Mars. And so we have a relationship there. Also in, again, the Golden Dawn attributions, the high priestess is the moon. And so the high priestess, and the moon is Pisces, but just the fact that she's a moon and this is a moon card, that's a really interesting relationship. So as we explore from the idea of dissolution into conjunction, both dissolution is a form of combining, in that dissolution dissolves everything into a unity, but conjunction is not quite the same thing. So what are the differences between dissolution and conjunction when you look at these cards?
Something just popped into my head, and I hope it addresses the question. So I look at color and shape and form. So just looking at the Emperor Justice moon line, the Emperor is sitting on a square block. Is that water around him? But
it does look like it is blue in this card, yes.
So but his feet are armored against it. and he's holding the little blue ball in his hand. So he's kind of like got this thing that says, well, you know, I'm the male energy, I'm the fire energy. I don't want to touch that water. It might, you know, that's kind of icky. And I'm kind of got this thing. Well, maybe I'll play with it. I'll see how it works. And his legs are crossed and he's armored against the water. Then when you move down to the middle card, to the Justice card, she is sitting on it. The blue is surrounding her and she's wearing it. So she's embraced it in a much more balanced form. So she isn't just like holding this little ball going, oh, how much does this weigh? Intuitive. She's like, okay, this is what it's worth. We're going to be totally balanced. So she's got her head, of course, with justice is the balance of mind and mercy, but she's wearing it. It's under control. And then if you look at the bottom card, now you have the little blue bug crustacean coming out of the water source. And it's like, okay, I'm safe to immerse myself in it now. I can handle this. I am this. I can identify with this. I can work with this. And now, and then it's looking and finding its way between the paths of opposites to get to the lunar energy beyond, which is the Luna, the connection to the water source itself. Now, I don't know if this makes any sense to anybody. I'm just
that's brilliant. That's brilliant. As always, Cheryl, brilliant.
Okay. Now, if we go back, if we follow the same pathway with the other line, the dissolution line, we have what I'm seeing is the pathway of the gold color. So we have the high priestess.
Oops, sorry.
We have the high priestess holding she's wearing the gold and she's holding the little golden book. And as if to say, okay, I'm about to crack this open. And it's funny how the gold of her braid kind of feeds out of that book around her body. You could imagine this. So she's got the book and now the gold is kind of coming up around her. So she's pretty comfortable with that. Now I'm thinking of gold as being solar energy and that sort of bright today wisdom. And then if we move down to the Hermit card, he's taken the gold out of that book and it's now in his light and he's holding it up for everybody to see. And he is also wearing the gold and the gold is in his walking stick. So that's helping propel him forward. So in looking at the shape of the walking stick, then if we go down to the Tower card, that walking stick has now crashed into that tower and opened that all up. And it's feeding all that golden enlightenment into the tower. And it's quite interesting. One of my teachers recently told me a different way of looking at the figures falling out of the tower. They're falling. They're not crashing. They haven't hit the ground. They're just falling. So it isn't the tower doesn't necessarily mean death and disaster and everything is going to fall apart. It's just like it's coming apart with the massive amount of enlightenment that the hermit stick has become that lightning bolt. So I think dissolution is a much more powerfully dismantling process, and what we're doing in conjunction is a much more gentle, a very gentle, non-destructive process.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I love it. Our next set, again, going mirror image outwards, we go back to dissolution here, and we go forwards to distillation. So dissolution on the left and distillation is on the right. And so the thing that I notice, and that's really interesting, is that we go from single figures. We do get some pairs down here, but we go into there's more of a gender balance over in the distillation. There's man and a man and a woman. There's two women and one man in this particular image. If we're using the Rider-Waite-Smith or the BOTA, we're looking at the Lovers card that just is man and a woman with the angel above. And then down with the Judgment card, we also get the man, woman, and child, again with an angel above. And here we have the man and woman, but they're separated out. And then this is interesting because we do get two figures falling from the tower. We do get the two, the dog and wolf, or whatever the two the two animals are. So as we look at conjunction and how it kind of grows from and reflects, but is opposite of dissolution, and as it ultimately leads into distillation, you know, do you have any thoughts on what that symbolism might be, what that might mean? And distillation, just to let you know, since we haven't gone that far yet, distillation is kind of a final purification process before achieving that ultimate philosopher's stone, which is coagulation, when everything is totally melded together. And conjunction is like a preview of that ultimate coagulation. And distillation here, the ones I'm asking about, is the final kind of purification process into that.
Well, you know, the funny thing about distillation in the making of alcohol, I got to see it in real life when I visited a major whiskey distillery, many, many years ago. And distillation involves fire, but it's wet fire. Because you've taken, you know, your original burning results and you mix them back into a liquid, and then you boil that liquid off, and then you feed the steam through a condensing tube, and what comes out of the condensing tube is the purest essence form of whatever it is you're looking for. So and it's interesting that distillation, looking at the Tower card, in many ways that describes that distillation process. You've got lightning coming out of a cloud, and then you've got rain coming down, kind of. It's yods and broken bricks and stuff, but it's still kind of a rain. And what you finally get out of it is the purest possible essence. And it involves water. And then I look at the Moon card, and then we have water coming out of that too. Trying to coordinate those two. In my brain, it makes sense. I just can't find the words to describe it.
Well, I'll share some of the thoughts that I had. I saw the dissolution process highlighted the feminine principle or the lunar principle at the higher level, the soul level of the process, and place the solar or masculine principle at the body level. And then in conjunction, the solar level is at the top, and the lunar level is at the bottom, at the body level, and this is at the soul level. And as we get into distillation, we really see those energies, male and female, and even we start to see the child coming into play here. You know, we see more of both of those energies, both the masculine and the feminine energy together at the higher level, and in this one at the body level as well. So all the variations, and even in the death card, there's a king and a queen, the head of a king and a queen in that card. And so it felt like the conjunction level as an intermediary step towards our ultimate coagulation brings those together, but with a little bit of a solar emphasis, a little bit of a more mind oriented and less body oriented, even though this is the earth realm. So maybe there's some alternate arguments, but the conjunction emphasizes this, and it's not until the later levels that we really see both the solar and the truly see that solar and lunar energies coming together. So those are just the thoughts that I had. I want to go into the tarot spread. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the cards that we looked at?
I have a quick thing I wanted to point out with your contrast with dissolution and distillation. I was thinking that, both of those work with the element of water, and in each of those elemental octaves, you kind of have a different way of approaching how it works, So in dissolution, it's kind of the water that brings things down or within, right? And a lot of the imagery we looked at for that was like, floods and drowning and swimming and being more immersed within the water. Whereas with dissolution, and like what Cheryl was talking about, we see more of the water that rises as steam, right? So there's kind of this tension between like below and above, and how the operations work. And so I think each of those elemental operations have their own sort of above and below counterpart. Calcination is the fire that kind of burns down or burns away until the ash and bone. But then in fermentation, you see that eliciting out of the spirits, right? And the bringing out of, as opposed to the stripping away. So I think that's another way to kind of compare those elemental operations, is they each kind of have their above and below mode of working.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, so I already put this into the chat. So if you don't have it or can't see it, by all means, speak up now, or forever hold your peace, as my father would say. And so we're going through the same process that we've done each time. So I'm going to do it a little bit faster than we've done before. So you're going to start with those three cards, the Emperor, Justice, and the Moon. And then we're going to come up with that sentence. And this is your personal sentence, is what this means to you. And so go ahead and come up with the Emperor as subject, the Justice card representing a verb, and then the Moon representing the object. Jot that down, and then we'll pull cards on that. So I'll give you a couple minutes for this, but this should be pretty familiar territory by now. And of course, you are more than welcome to pull these three cards out of your own deck and look at them that way. Okay, so once you've got your sentence, then you're going to think back to that thing that you selected at the beginning of the Alchemy series that you wanted to transform, and what you wanted that to change into. And we had expressed this thing that you want to change and what you want to change it into. We'd expressed those as tarot cards back in the beginning. So you might pull those two cards out if you did that. If you're newer to the process and don't have anything, you're welcome to just think of something you want to change right now or pull a card on it. And so thinking of the thing that you want to change, we're going to look at spread position 1 is to focus, first of all, on the Emperor and the word phrase that you came up for that card. So concentrating on your word that is the subject of your sentence based on the Emperor, you'll ask, what is this for me? And then shuffle up, pull a card. I'm going to grab a deck here. Shuffle up and pull a card for for the subject. What is the subject emperor word for me? What is the verb or the justice word for me? And what is the kind of how does this express in my life is another way of looking at. And then how does the moon or the object of the sentence, how does that express for me right now? Okay, well, I'm getting really interesting, very helpful cards. Hopefully you guys are too. Okay, so now that you've got your 3 cards, go ahead and do an interpretation. I'm only going to give you a couple minutes for this. We're not going to, you're welcome, obviously, to take this home and continue. You're all at home because we're on Zoom, but I still am using the vocabulary from many years ago when we always met in person. You're welcome to take this home with you and work on it on your own and give it more time. It really deserves a certain amount of time, but it's personal time. It's not something we need to do in group. But for now, go ahead and jot down some initial interpretations. And then once you have your interpretation done, you're going to find your synthesis card. And so for each of these 3 cards that you've pulled, you'll find a visual cue, a detail in the imagery that that most clearly inspired or influenced your interpretation of that card. And so you'll find one visual cue or a detail in the imagery that most inspired your interpretation, and then look through your deck, the synthesis card, then you would look through your deck for one card that has those 3 visual details or visual cues on it. Oh, cool. Okay, I like this one. Okay, cool. And now in this final card, the synthesis card, represents this alchemical transformation at this stage. And again, this stage is in the whitening phase. And so it's transitioning from what we want to change. It's the transition into what that's ultimately going to be. And so this synthesis card should give you insight into how this process is going to work for you. Well, that's our time for today. Penny or John, do you have anything you want to say to sum up?
Just another great class and stage, and thank you everyone.
And I never have anything to say. I'm like Silent Bob.
We've made a turn at the wheel, so it's all downhill from here.
Oh my goodness, thank goodness. Except it gets harder and harder. I'm sure each of those last few stages has got to be much more difficult.